Here's a shocking fact: 95% of people will make the same predictable mistakes their ancestors made 500 years ago. Machiavelli documented these patterns of human stupidity with surgical precision, revealing 10 core weaknesses that govern how people think, act, and deceive themselves. These aren't just observations. They're the operating manual that separates those who lead from those who are led, those who see clearly from those who stumble blindly through life. By the end of this video, you'll possess the same cold understanding that allowed Machiavelli to predict human behavior with terrifying accuracy. Tell me, what do you think stupidity truly is? A lack of education? A dull mind? No, that is the mistake of those who only look at appearances. True stupidity is not the absence of intelligence, it is the refusal to use it. You will meet countless people who can read, write, calculate, and speak eloquently, yet they live, act, and decide like fools. Why? Because knowledge without discipline is merely decoration for the ignorant. I have seen in courts and councils the same pattern repeated endlessly. Men who could quote philosophers, command armies, or speak of honor, yet trembled before truth when it demanded action. Their minds were capable, but their courage was not. They knew what was right, but preferred what was easy. That, my friend, is the seed of stupidity. It grows not in the soil of ignorance, but in the comfort of convenience. The fool's greatest weakness is not that he cannot think. It is that he does not want to think. Thinking forces him to confront his mistakes, to question his comforts, to admit his weaknesses, and that he cannot bear. So he chooses blindness, calls it peace, and names his delusion happiness. Such men fill the world. They fill palaces, universities, and temples. They are everywhere. Truth is unwelcome. The truly stupid man builds his life around opinions instead of principles. He speaks before he observes, he judges before he understands, and he believes before he investigates. His intelligence is locked behind the iron gates of his ego. He cannot learn because he already believes he knows. He cannot grow because he fears what growth will reveal about his own smallness. I once watched a nobleman of Florence, clever, admired, loved by the court, ruin his entire estate because he trusted his pride more than reason. Every advisor warned him, every sign screamed caution. Yet he insisted that his instincts were right. His failure was not born from ignorance, but from arrogance disguised as confidence. You see, the fool's mind does not lack fuel. It burns with the wrong fire. His emotions are his rulers, his reason, their servant. Stupidity has a certain charm. It is loud, confident, and self-assured. The fool walks proudly into ruin, while the wise man hesitates at every step. The crowd, of course, follows the confident fool, for confidence is easier to worship than caution. This is why stupidity spreads faster than wisdom. It flatters the ego while wisdom demands humility. And the masses, my dear pupil, would rather be flattered than enlightened. The worst form of stupidity is not ignorance, but certainty. When a man becomes convinced that he cannot be wrong, he becomes immune to truth. He will twist facts to fit his comfort and reject logic if it threatens his beliefs. Such men destroy empires while believing they are saving them. They silence those who disagree and call it justice. They fear silence, for in silence their illusions echo too loudly. To understand stupidity is to understand power. The wise ruler does not waste time arguing with fools. He studies them. He watches how they move, what they desire, and how easily they can be led. For the fool's pride is his leash. Give him a stage, a little applause, a taste of importance, and he will obey you without ever realizing it. The intelligent man acts, but the fool reacts, and whoever controls the fool's reactions controls him entirely. The tragedy is that stupidity believes itself to be wisdom. The man who refuses to learn calls himself independent. The one who cannot listen calls himself bold. The one who destroys himself calls it fate. And thus, the world keeps spinning under the rule of those too proud to see their own blindness. Intelligence is not measured by how much you know, but by how bravely you confront what you don't. A man who can master his impulses, silence his vanity, and question his certainty. That is the rarest intelligence of all. But most would rather feel right than be right. They prefer the warmth of illusion to the cold clarity of truth. And so, kingdoms fall, leaders fail, and fools rise to power not because they are clever, but because clever men grow tired of explaining reason to the unreasonable. You must remember this: stupidity is not passive. It fights, it defends itself, it mocks wisdom, and it hunts down truth like an enemy. It hates silence, for silence exposes its noise. It hates reason, for reason reveals its madness. It thrives on distraction, comfort, and flattery. It multiplies in crowds and hides in virtue. And once it captures a man's heart, it chains his mind forever. Observe the world carefully, and you will see that stupidity moves like a plague, while intelligence moves like a whisper. One fool can infect 100 wise men, but 100 wise men cannot cure one fool. That is the dark arithmetic of human nature. Stupidity spreads not through force, but through comfort. It tells people what they want to hear, not what they need to understand. It flatters their emotions, fuels their pride, and shields them from the discomfort of thinking. Intelligence demands effort. Stupidity offers relief. And most men will choose relief every time. The power of stupidity lies in its simplicity. The fool speaks in certainties, never questions, never doubts. His words are easy to digest, his convictions unshakable, and his confidence contagious. The crowd, wary of complexity, gathers around him like moths to a dim flame, believing it to be light. I have seen this happen in courts and councils, where one confident idiot speaks louder than 10 cautious thinkers, and his voice becomes law simply because it requires no thought to follow. The masses do not crave truth, they crave clarity, even if that clarity is false. The wise man analyzes before he speaks, and so his words come slow. The fool reacts instantly, and so his noise fills the silence. And when the world must choose between silence and noise, it always chooses the noise. Stupidity thrives in this hunger for entertainment, for quick answers, for simplicity dressed as wisdom. This is why intelligent men often remain alone. They think while others perform. There is something seductive about stupidity. It feels honest. It pretends to be natural, emotional, spontaneous. It says, "I speak from the heart," while wisdom speaks from the mind. The crowd admires this rawness, mistaking recklessness for authenticity. The fool becomes a hero, and the wise man a villain. This is why stupidity is not just a personal flaw. It is a social weapon. It manipulates emotion better than reason ever could. I once observed a ruler who governed not with truth, but with the illusion of truth. He said whatever pleased the majority, even if it contradicted itself. He understood that stupidity craves comfort, not consistency, and the more he indulged their ignorance, the more they worshipped him. The people who refused to think became his loyal soldiers, defending lies as if they were sacred. That is the true danger of stupidity. It does not merely exist. Stupidity spreads fastest where emotion rules over reason. It feeds on anger, fear, and pride. A single lie, if emotional enough, will travel farther than 100 facts. This is why truth often arrives too late, because it walks while stupidity runs. The fool shouts, the wise man pauses, and in that pause the crowd makes its choice. Intelligence requires isolation, stupidity demands company. The fool cannot bear to be alone because silence forces him to think. So he gathers others, repeats his opinions, and feels stronger in the echo of agreement. Groups of fools are the most dangerous armies in the world, for they believe their numbers make them right. The crowd turns stupidity into culture, and culture turns ignorance into law. I have seen scholars silenced by mobs who could not spell their own arguments. I have seen truth buried beneath applause, and reason drowned beneath laughter. That is how stupidity wins. It entertains while it destroys. The fool's confidence is more persuasive than the thinker's logic because confidence gives the illusion of strength. An illusion always sells better than reality. Once stupidity takes root in a society, it does not need permission to grow. It spreads through gossip, through imitation, through admiration of mediocrity. It rewards emotion, punishes reflection, and convinces the masses that thinking deeply is a waste of time. It rebrands ignorance as honesty, simplicity as truth, and arrogance as bravery. Those who question are called cynical, those who obey are called loyal. The wise man must understand this: stupidity does not conquer by argument, it conquers by presence. It fills every space where thought has been abandoned. It multiplies wherever people seek comfort over clarity. And when the masses find safety in stupidity, they will defend it with more passion than they ever defended truth. There is a dangerous form of stupidity that wears the mask of virtue. It does not scream or stumble, it preaches. It cloaks itself in righteousness, speaks of justice, and believes it stands on moral high ground. This is the stupidity that destroys nations in the name of goodness. It is the fool who believes he is pure, and therefore beyond error. I have seen this kind of stupidity destroy kings faster than any sword, for you cannot reason with a man who believes his ignorance is holy. The clever fool does not call himself stupid, he calls himself moral. He believes his feelings are truth, his outrage is justice, and his compassion is wisdom. He judges without understanding and condemns without reflection. Such a man is more dangerous than the liar, because the liar knows he lies, but the moral fool believes he is saving the world while he burns it. When stupidity joins hands with self-righteousness, it becomes unstoppable. It no longer seeks truth, it seeks approval from its own reflection. I once watched a council in Florence destroy a wise advisor simply because he told them what they did not wish to hear. They called him cruel, heartless, and arrogant. They accused him of lacking virtue when in truth he only lacked hypocrisy. His crime was honesty. But in a world ruled by moral fools, honesty becomes an offense. The council rejoiced at his removal, congratulating themselves for defending justice. And yet, within a year, their state fell to ruin because they had chosen moral satisfaction over rational survival. That is how stupidity hides. It dresses itself in the costume of virtue. Stupidity disguised as morality has one defining trait: it replaces thought with emotion. The fool believes that to feel strongly about something is the same as understanding it. He weeps, he shouts, he accuses, but never examines. He wants to appear good more than he wants to be good. And in his hunger to display his virtue, he becomes blind to the damage he causes. He will punish others in the name of kindness, silence dissent in the name of peace, and destroy order in the name of fairness. The wise man must recognize that morality without reason is madness. A society led by emotional virtue becomes a theater of chaos, where actors perform goodness and call it leadership. The truly stupid moralist cannot see the difference between mercy and weakness, between justice and vengeance. He obeys his feelings as if they were divine commandments. And once he believes he is chosen by righteousness, he becomes incapable of guilt. That is when stupidity reaches its highest form. It believes itself to be holy. There is no easier way to manipulate the masses than through moral stupidity. Tell the people they are virtuous. Tell them their anger is noble. Tell them their hatred is righteous, and they will follow you into any abyss. The wise ruler understands this and uses it carefully. He knows that men crave the illusion of goodness more than the discipline of truth. They want to feel moral, even when they act foolishly. And so, a clever manipulator can lead a crowd by feeding their sense of virtue instead of their intelligence. Stupidity hides behind slogans and sacred words. It speaks of love while sowing division. It preaches tolerance while demanding obedience. It uses moral language to disguise personal weakness and emotional immaturity. These are not men of principle, but of performance. They do not seek justice. They seek validation, and when that validation is threatened, they become cruel in the name of kindness. I have witnessed peasants who believed that punishing a wise man made them heroes of virtue. They thought silence was peace and ignorance was purity. The more they simplified morality, the more easily they could be controlled. For the simple mind cannot endure moral complexity. It wants clear villains and clear saints, even if neither truly exists. The moral fool cannot see that his goodness is often guided by pride. He helps others not out of compassion, but out of the pleasure of feeling superior. He condemns others not to protect truth, but to protect his own image of purity. He becomes a slave to his emotions and calls it conscience. And in doing so, he replaces wisdom with performance, justice with self-praise, and truth with noise. When stupidity disguises itself as morality, it no longer fears truth, it believes it owns it. And that belief, more than ignorance, is what destroys the wise, empowers the hypocrite, and blinds entire civilizations. Power rarely falls because of the enemy outside, it collapses because of the stupidity within. I have seen kings blame fate, generals curse betrayal, and ministers accuse conspiracies. But the truth is far simpler. Stupidity eats empires from the inside, silently, patiently, like rot in a grand wooden pillar. It starts small, unnoticed, in decisions made out of pride instead of prudence, comfort instead of calculation. And by the time the ruler realizes his mistake, his throne is already sinking beneath the weight of foolish loyalty and blind confidence. Power demands intelligence, not just in thought, but in control. The wise ruler must understand that stupidity in his court is more dangerous than rebellion in his streets. A fool with authority will ruin what 1,000 enemies could not touch. Yet, many leaders surround themselves with fools, mistaking flattery for loyalty and ignorance for simplicity. They call these men faithful, when in truth, they are parasites feeding on power's weakness. I have seen courts filled with laughter while their kingdoms burned, because stupidity always disguises itself as harmony before it strikes as chaos. The foolish ruler believes that goodwill and popularity can replace judgment and discipline. He believes that kindness is strength, that everyone around him shares his intentions. But stupidity never serves power, it only serves itself. The foolish courtier praises his master while quietly poisoning his rule through incompetence. He agrees with every decision, no matter how reckless, for fear of losing favor, and thus stupidity grows in silence, protected by obedience. The ruler who cannot bear to be challenged creates his own army of idiots. I once watched a great commander lose a war not because of his enemies, but because his subordinates feared to tell him the truth. Each man beneath him saw the error but chose silence, thinking it wiser to protect their own position than to protect victory. That is how stupidity conquers power. It spreads through fear, pride, and comfort until truth becomes an enemy and flattery becomes the new law. The moment a leader prefers agreement to honesty, he begins his own downfall. The clever enemy need not attack the strong ruler directly. He only needs to make him trust the foolish, let him promote the incompetent, reward the flattering, and ignore the wise. Soon, his own servants will turn his intelligence into impotence. His kingdom will crumble not through invasion, but through mismanagement. History is filled with such tragedies. Rulers undone not by external force, but by internal blindness. The most dangerous form of stupidity within power is arrogance disguised as confidence. It convinces leaders that their instincts are divine, their actions unquestionable. They stop seeking counsel, believing they have become too wise for advice. But intelligence decays the moment it stops listening. When a leader becomes surrounded by yes men, stupidity no longer needs to enter. It has already won. A wise ruler keeps the fool close enough to observe, but far enough to limit. He knows that stupidity is contagious, especially among those addicted to comfort and praise. Once a man begins to believe that authority itself makes him intelligent, he stops learning. He becomes trapped in his own echo, mistaking the silence of fear for respect. I have seen this happen in courts, in armies, and in every institution where obedience kills truth. The fool within power often comes wrapped in loyalty. He claims to protect the leader, but his decisions destroy him piece by piece. He wastes resources, misjudges men, speaks without thought, and acts without foresight. Yet, because he is loyal, his stupidity is tolerated, and soon tolerated stupidity becomes the new standard of leadership. That is when collapse begins, not with revolt, but with laughter, as men cheer their own ruin believing it to be progress. The wise man must never forget that intelligence protects power, but power corrupts intelligence. The more comfortable authority becomes, the less it listens, the less it questions, the less it learns. Stupidity thrives in that comfort. It whispers, "You are safe, you are right, you are loved." And once the ruler believes that voice, his crown is already slipping from his head. Every empire, every dynasty, every institution carries the seeds of its own destruction, not in its enemies, but in the fools it tolerates. The downfall of power does not begin with war. It begins with the moment the ruler starts mistaking flattery for wisdom and obedience for loyalty. Every man believes he is guided by reason, yet watch closely, and you will see that emotion is the true ruler of most minds. It is the silent tyrant that commands the fool while convincing him that he is free. Stupidity thrives where emotion governs and reason kneels. It whispers to pride, feeds on fear, and poisons judgment. The cleverest fool is not the one who knows little, but the one who feels too much. For when emotion takes the throne, intelligence becomes its servant, and reason becomes a tool to justify madness. I have seen men of great intellect become slaves to their passions, unable to separate thought from feeling. One moment they speak of justice, the next they demand vengeance. One day they praise humility, the next they destroy others to protect their ego. Emotion blinds them, and once blinded, they call their blindness truth. This is the subtle poison of stupidity. It convinces a man that his impulses are moral, his anger righteous, his jealousy logical. He does not think, he reacts, and in that reaction he becomes predictable, controllable, and weak. The wise ruler must learn that emotion is the easiest instrument of manipulation. To control a fool, you do not need chains. You need only to provoke his feelings. The moment a man becomes emotional, he loses his ability to think strategically. He speaks too soon, decides too quickly, and regrets too late. History is filled with men who destroyed their futures not because they were ignorant, but because they were emotional. Their hearts spoke louder than their minds, and so they mistook their passion for purpose. The fool worships his emotions as divine. He believes that to follow the heart is a sign of purity, when in truth it is the beginning of chaos. I have seen men destroy their alliances, abandon reason, and even betray their loved ones, all because they mistook temporary feelings for eternal truth. Emotion, when ungoverned, is like fire. It brings light when controlled, but it devours everything when it escapes discipline. The fool holds the flame too close, then blames the world when he burns. Emotion feeds stupidity because it gives it strength. It fuels anger against logic, hate against reflection, pride against humility. The more emotional a man becomes, the more certain he feels, and the more certain he feels, the less capable he is of learning. Stupidity does not want knowledge. It wants validation. The fool would rather be wrong and passionate than right and calm. He cannot stand still long enough to understand. He must always react, always speak, always feel. The wise man, however, learns the power of silence, because silence cools emotion and restores clarity. The crowd is the perfect host for emotional stupidity. A single fool can infect thousands when the atmosphere burns with passion. The more people feel together, the less they think individually. This is why the masses are easy to move and difficult to reason with. Emotion unites them, but it also blinds them. A ruler who understands this can control nations by controlling their feelings. Tell them what to fear, whom to hate, what to love, and they will destroy reason with their own hands. They will call it loyalty, call it justice, call it freedom. I once saw a crowd in Florence cheer the downfall of a man who had served them faithfully for years. They did not care for his loyalty or his wisdom. They only cared that his fall satisfied their anger. They were not guided by facts, only by the thrill of emotion. And when the anger passed, they looked around and found themselves leaderless. But fools never learn from their grief. They only wait for another emotion to lead them again. The wise man must therefore master his emotions, not by killing them, but by disciplining them. To feel is human, but to be ruled by feeling is stupidity. Every emotion carries temptation. Anger tempts you to act before understanding. Fear tempts you to retreat before analysis. Love tempts you to trust without question, and pride tempts you to destroy what could have saved you. Each emotion has its wisdom, but only if reason holds the reins. Without reason, even love becomes a weapon, and kindness becomes manipulation. Stupidity will always speak through emotion because emotion requires no evidence. It sounds pure, it feels right, it convinces easily. This is why the fool believes that intensity equals truth. But the truth does not scream, it whispers. The wise must learn to hear that whisper beneath the storm of feeling. For as long as men worship emotion more than reason, they will remain puppets of their own weakness. And those who understand this weakness will always rule over them. The most terrifying thing about stupidity is not that it makes mistakes. It is that it never learns from them. The fool lives in a loop, endlessly repeating his failures while believing he is starting anew. He ruins opportunities, loses allies, destroys peace, and yet calls it destiny. He learns nothing, forgets nothing, and blames everything. To watch stupidity in motion is to watch history repeat itself under different names. The faces change, the weapons change, but the ignorance remains the same. I have seen men commit the same errors their fathers once made, and still call themselves wise. They follow the same roads to ruin, convinced their journey will lead elsewhere because they are the ones walking it. That is the greatest illusion of stupidity. It believes that repetition is persistence. The fool does not adapt, he endures. He mistakes stubbornness for strength, pride for progress, and luck for wisdom. Every failure becomes someone else's fault, every consequence an accident. And so, his life becomes a theater of mistakes replayed in endless scenes of denial. The tragedy deepens when stupidity gains power. For when a fool learns nothing, his errors multiply through others. I have seen rulers who lost wars not once but many times, each time believing that fate betrayed them, never realizing that their arrogance did. They replace wisdom with optimism, reason with routine, and call it leadership. But repetition without reflection is not strength, it is suicide stretched over time. The fool dies the same death every day, only in different ways. Stupidity despises memory because memory demands accountability. To remember one's mistake is to face one's weakness. But the fool's pride cannot endure that weight. He rewrites his past, edits his shame, and paints his failures as victories. He would rather live in a comforting illusion than confront an uncomfortable truth. That is why the foolish man grows older, but never wiser. His body ages, his arrogance matures, and his ignorance becomes tradition. He passes his blindness to others as inheritance. I have seen families, nations, and entire civilizations collapse because they refused to learn. They celebrated ignorance as culture and called caution cowardice. They repeated the same corruption, the same deceit, the same false hope, believing each time that the outcome would change. That is the law of stupidity, to keep striking the same wall and then curse the wall for not breaking. The wise see patterns, the fool sees coincidences. The difference between progress and destruction lies in the ability to remember. The fool's memory is selective. He remembers his victories too vividly and his failures too faintly. When he loses, he blames. When he wins, he boasts. There is no reflection, no adjustment, no evolution. His arrogance turns every mistake into a myth about destiny. He convinces himself that wisdom is unnecessary, that experience is enough. But experience without reflection is wasted. A man may live 100 years and still die ignorant if he refuses to learn from the wounds he caused himself. The wise man studies history because he knows stupidity repeats itself in cycles. He sees in past mistakes the warning signs of the future. The fool, however, believes that history is old and irrelevant. He says, "Times have changed." As if human nature had not remained the same. He calls warnings pessimism and mistakes new challenges. That is why stupidity survives every era. It wears new clothes, speaks new words, and yet commits the same old crimes. The repetition of stupidity is not just intellectual, it is emotional. The fool repeats relationships that hurt him, trusts the same kind of deceivers, and falls for the same manipulations. His heart forgets faster than his mind learns. Emotion blinds him again and again, convincing him that this time it will be different. But emotion without reflection is a wheel that never stops spinning, dragging him through the same pain, the same regret, the same justifications. The fool's greatest fear is change, for change requires understanding. He clings to habits that destroy him because they feel familiar. He repeats old mistakes because they are comfortable. The unknown terrifies him more than failure, so he chooses failure again and again. He would rather suffer predictably than think painfully. And so, stupidity survives not through lack of knowledge, but through fear of growth. The wise man, when he fails, asks, "Why?" The fool asks, "Who is to blame?" That single difference divides progress from ruin. Stupidity can read, speak, and even imitate intelligence, but it cannot evolve. It repeats itself endlessly, always louder, always prouder, and always surprised when the end remains the same. Conclusion, the eternal shadow of human stupidity. And so, we return to where we began, the disease that destroys men, kingdoms, and legacies not through force, but through blindness. Stupidity is not simply ignorance, it is the deliberate rejection of thought. It wears many masks: confidence, morality, emotion, loyalty. Yet beneath them all lies the same decaying truth, a refusal to learn, to question, to grow. It is the invisible hand that turns wisdom into arrogance, freedom into chaos, and strength into ruin. Look at history, and you will see the same story told again and again. Empires collapsing under their own foolish pride, rulers deafened by flattery, and men mistaking passion for purpose. Human stupidity is the only constant that time has never managed to erase. And still, every generation believes it will be different. Every age calls itself enlightened, and yet it stumbles over the same stones its ancestors did centuries before. The wise are outnumbered, but never powerless. Their advantage is not in numbers, but in awareness. To understand stupidity is to defend yourself from it, to recognize its voice in others, and more importantly, in yourself. For the fool outside you can only wound you. The fool within can destroy you. The battle against stupidity is not fought with swords or speeches, but with observation, silence, and discipline. Do not argue with fools, for they drag you into their theater. Instead, study them, learn their patterns, and use their predictability as your weapon. Power belongs to those who see the unseen, and nothing blinds the masses more completely than their own stupidity. The world will always have its fools. They will speak the loudest, move the fastest, and fall the hardest. Let them. Your task is not to save them, but to avoid becoming one of them. In a world drowning in noise, the man who can still think clearly is already a ruler.